StorSimple session, expanding your data center into Azure. I'm Megan Leese. I'm the Technical Product Marketing Manager for the StorSimple Group. Here with me today, I have Jamie Peebles. He's one of our TSPs. Many of you might know him. I saw him shaking a bunch of hands in the room before we get started. He's going to be here talking and demoing some stuff for us today. Additionally, we have Les. He's sitting in the front row, but he's going to come up later, and he's a customer and he's from Textron. He's going to talk to us about some hands-on real-life stuff a little bit later in the session. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. A couple of the things I want to kind of highlight, the three things we're going to focus on, is this is enterprise storage. This is what you're used to. This is like the enterprise storage that you always have known. However, now we're integrating it into the cloud, and we're going to talk about how that makes sense and why you can still put this into your data center and expect to have that same experience you've always had with other types of enterprise storage. We're going to talk about integrated management. This is new because now we're able to manage your storage resources in your data center along with the storage resources and other Azure services together from one management portal. This is simplified management for you. It's integrated, and it brings together a whole new hybrid cloud scenario. And then finally, we're going to talk about disaster recovery, because one of the main things here is that you can have DR for everything, and you do it in a different way than you've ever expected. And then finally, about how you can have the mobility of your data sets that originate on-premise in Azure, and you can do new things with that. So those are the three main topics we're going to cover in our discussion. The structure of our session is going to be a discussion about the topics, an overview of StorSimple. We'll talk about what those features are. We're going to go into the integrated management, and then we'll follow that up with a demo. We'll get you involved in how this solution works. Then we'll talk about disaster recovery and the mobility components, the features that are there to enable all of this, and then we'll go and demo that as well so you can see how that works. And then finally, we'll bring Les up here, and we'll talk about his deployment of StorSimple, his plans, what it's doing for his business, in a nice Q&A forum. So with that, we'll go and get started. All right, so hybrid cloud storage for the enterprise. This is important because we're used to traditional storage. We're used to having my NAS or my SAN in my data center, and this is what I've always thought of as enterprise storage. Now we have hybrid storage, and everyone's kind of like, all right, well, you know, cloud storage is for a very small subset of things. It really doesn't meet my enterprise requirements. However, when you have hybrid cloud storage come into your data center, you kind of have the best of both worlds, and that's what we're going to talk about in this section. So before we get started, hybrid cloud storage kind of fits into this four set of offerings, right? You kind of have where your applications and your VMs or whatever run in your private data center. You have a private cloud. This could be because you have requirements that don't allow you to be in a public cloud, or that's just how your infrastructure is set up. But then you have the hybrid cloud. This is where you want to have your applications running in your data center, and then you have your appliance in that data center, and then you are also integrating with the cloud. And then finally, there's the public cloud. So these are kind of the four offerings that Microsoft has, and this is where we'll fit in and we'll be discussing more today. So StorSimple. We have a 2 or 4U device, and that goes in your data center. This is on-premise in your customer data center. This is what you have, the power, the rack space, 2U, 4U. We have 2 devices. They're an 8100 or an 8600, and they have anywhere from 15 to 40 terabytes of local storage there. That then seamlessly extends into Azure as a single solution. So then your Azure storage is there for that single solution. And we'll go into how that looks in a little bit. What this replaces is that end-to-end infrastructure. The primary storage, the archive, the backup, DR, all of that is integrated into the single solution over here. What does it do for you in the end? It helps you simplify your management. It helps you integrate any of your backup solutions. I know a lot of times you have your own backup software, you have your own backup hardware. Now that can be completely integrated in with with your primary and archive, this cloud storage solution. Additionally, it also brings the agility factor, because now you can use the cloud. You can grow on demand. You can import data sets into Azure. You can do a number of other different things to really bring value, helps you reduce your spend, and grow your storage and your infrastructure in the cloud. servers there, and you can have them in with SMB3, continuously available shares. You can have them as a clustered file server, completely HA at the server side. And then you have that connecting to your device over iSCSI, and your device is this highly available enterprise storage device in your data center, connecting over the internet into Azure. In Azure, you have multiple ways of redundancy with geo, zone redundant, LRS, ZRS, GRS, those types of different redundancy in the cloud. So it's this completely Microsoft end-to-end solution with redundancy at each point to ensure that it fits into your enterprise environment. Okay, like I said before, this is your box. This is what goes into your data center. Now, it has two components. We have hardware and software features in there that help you keep that HA, that high availability standpoint there. There's HA with storage spaces at the drive level. You have HA non-disruptive upgrades. You have failover between I/O devices, a passive, active type of I/O modules in there to help with failover. So from a hardware and a software perspective, the HA and that enterprise quality is built into the solution. Additionally, there's a set of features that go with it that enable it not to be just an enterprise storage solution, but then to go and extend into the cloud and make it a single solution with the cloud. So some of those things are like the dedupe and compression. So we're optimizing the capacity usage. This is important because when you have 15 to 40 terabytes of local storage, you want to be able to dedupe and compress and make the most of that local storage. So we'll go into when that happens, but we have dedupe and compression. You have automated tiering, and what that enables us to do is as data comes in, it's stored on the local appliance. It can then be automatically tiered from that local appliance into Azure. And this is based on a heat map for the data. Thank you.
Should we unbox it? It's like Christmas.
So,
you can't just leave
so we'll
it here,
take,
right?
yeah, we're going to just kind of unveil this here. So to give you guys an idea of what's going into your data center, we brought a box in.
Hold on a minute. Wait for it. I know the answer to this question. Hey, guys, hang on a second. There's another box. It's not this one. This one, like, I'm strong and all, but yeah, I don't do this with 2 U-box of disks.
That's the virtual machine, right?
Yeah, that's the VM. That's well played.
Cool. So that's how small it is.
So for those of you who are wondering what it looks like, there's one downstairs in the expo hall, and there's probably another one somewhere in the back of the expo hall, but we'll have to look and find that later on.
Anyway.
Sorry for the disappointment, I guess.
Yeah, they might get it up here, but there's a picture up there, so that's what it looks like, and hopefully you have time to make it down to the booth to check it out as well. Anyway, I'll finish up here on talking about, we have the automated tiering, and that's to simplify the management. So the management goes from your on-premise box, and that's where we want to keep that hot data set. And the idea here is that your hot data stays local on the appliance. The cold data is what gets tiered to Azure. And this is important because this solution is built on the concept that you have a working data set, and that's where your performance needs to be. So it resides on your SSD and your HDD, which is on this local appliance. The non-working set, or what a lot of people call is my cold data, it might be your archive data, that gets pushed to Azure, and that's all based on a heat map for how the tiering works. Yes, we have a question.
What becomes the authoritative source of that data? Do you keep the metadata on the local device? Or when you spit things out to the web, does the web now become, or the cloud become the authoritative data source for that?
Restate the question.
All right, so I'm going to restate the question. It sounds like he's asking, where does the metadata reside for that volume? Like, is it on your device or is it in the cloud? So what I want to tell you is when you create a volume, and we're going to go through this in a few minutes, we're going to go more in depth into this. When you create a volume, that volume has your metadata and the primary data associated with. However, that data can reside either on the local appliance or in the cloud. And the metadata map is associated with the volume and tells where that block resides, that block of data resides. And we'll go through what that looks like here in a few minutes as we talk more about the automated tiering. So we have cloud snapshots. This is really important because, and unique because you can now back up into Azure. That one relieves some of the pressure on storing your backups on your local appliance. It also enables you to have that location independence so that you can use it for DR or recover stuff directly from the cloud. And then finally, everything is secure. The security is built completely into the system. So you're not having to go and make sure your data is secure separately. This is all an integrated part of what Microsoft Azure StorSimple brings to the table. All right, so we're going to start off talking about security, and this is kind of one of the questions we get the most, right? Is how do I ensure that my data is safe, that it's in a secure spot? And so the simple answer is when you create your data structures, create a volume container, you define the keys. And those keys are stored on the device, and the device resides in your data center. We don't have the keys. We don't want them. They can't be accessed. Your data cannot be accessed by anyone other than you or the device, because that's where the device keys are stored. So sometimes an analogy that kind of helps me understand this is that it's like your car keys, right? We have two sets of car keys. I unlock my car, and I can drive my car, and I'm secure in that. No one else has that access. No one else has my keys, right? That's how you kind of secure yourself. So think about having the keys. So that's for customer data. The other important piece to remember is that, and to understand with security, is that your data goes through Azure. The management is all run out of Azure. It's a service that's managed through Azure. So a lot of times people ask, well, how do I ensure that my data that goes through Azure is also secure? So, there's a public-private key pair, and you'll see this kind of with the blue lines there. And all data is encrypted at the browser level and sent to the device. The device is the only thing that has a key that can actually decrypt that data, okay? So data flowing through the management portal is secure, and your data is always secure before it ever leaves the device, so in flight, and then your data is always secure once it's stored in Azure. And our slides kind of give you the overview, AES 256-bit encryption, and the flow of that. The last part there is account access, and Azure has its own authentication for how access can be done through the portal. And so that is all in play because the management's all done through the Azure Management Portal. All right, so now we'll talk about the tiering, and hopefully this might kind of go back to some of the questions we had here a minute ago. All right, so data, you have an SSD and an HDD tier. They're identified as SAS. And data comes into that SSD tier, and this is stored linearly. It gets written to the disk, and then it gets deduplicated. So none of your redundant blocks are then stored. So they have a fingerprint. This is what we call a fingerprint. This is the metadata and the primary data, and they are deduplicated at this point.
Does the dedupe happen on the fly, or is it scheduled once every 24 hours? How's it?
Inline deduplication. All right, so now we're at the SSD level where it's deduplicated, and then prior to, as we tier, there's a threshold that's set. So for the SSD level tier, as we approach maybe it's around between 80 and 90%, it starts to tier to your HDD level. This is to prevent like an influx of data as it comes in that you're never exceeding what your tier can handle. So that's why it's around the 80-90% threshold that we start tiering to the next level. So when it goes into HDD, it's also compressed. So that's where the compression happens. So it tiers into that HDD level. We now have compressed and deduped data, making the most of your on-premise data. And then it gets tiered to Azure. That, again, when your HDD level reaches 80-90% of a threshold, it gets tiered into Azure. Now remember, all of the data before it actually leaves your on-premise device is encrypted and then stored in Azure. If you have to read a block from Azure, then that can get pulled back into the SSD tier, and there's a read type cache in the SSD tier for blocks that are read back from the cloud. unencrypted back onto your device. Still deduped. Okay, so a couple of points I wanted to make. If we think back to what we talked about, we had the 8100 and the 8600. So you have 15 terabytes and 40 terabytes. So that, your SSD and your SAS tier, your HDD tier, that's what makes up your 15 and 40 terabytes. So your SSD tier for the 8100 is about, I think, 800 gigs, and the remainder is HDD. And then about 2 terabytes of SSD, with the remainder being HDD on the 8600. So that's kind of how that breaks out, and that capacity would be used for the tiering, just how we talked about. The last part is, remember what we talked about. Tiering is to keep the working set local and the cold data pushed to the cloud. So that's why the capacity utilization of the HDD and the SSD tier is important, and so is dedupe, because if you have a working set that is highly, can be deduped a lot, sometimes we see customers that can store, the local capacity, the raw local capacity is 15 terabytes. However, you can store maybe up to 75 terabytes if you get the dedupe part of it, and then 40 up to sometimes, I think 100 and something terabytes of user data can actually be stored when you have high dedupe ratios. So those are a couple of things to think about on here when you're thinking about workloads that you might want to deploy on a StorSimple. All right, so cloud snapshots. What do they enable you to do? Cloud snapshots enable us to do location independence, recovery of data, and then it also allows us to do store our snapshots off of our on-premise, so we're not using up our local capacity, that more expensive storage in our data center for our backups. And if you want to have long-term backups, keep backups for years, it's really nice to be able to push those out to the cloud rather than keeping them on your local device. So cloud snapshots happen. So I just took a picture of the data that's there. So you have your data, it's fully copied, and then it's encrypted and sent into Azure. That metadata map is also, that's kind of the box there, is supposed to be our metadata map. Everything is sent into Azure, and you have a snapshot with a metadata map and all of the blocks. It's a complete copy of data when it goes into Azure, and it's stored there as a cloud snapshot. The second part of this is then if you wrote another block and you took another snapshot the next day, it's not going to recopy everything there. It's just an incremental copy. It encrypts that incremental block, copies that off along with a metadata map. However, that new metadata map points to all of the blocks that correspond to that snapshot. So those snapshots are incremental. So the metadata is saved off there in its entirety, and then it allows you to do your disaster recovery or any type of recovery you wanted to do from a cloud snapshot. So we'll go off and talk about the disaster recovery with snapshots. So one of the cool things about the DR is that we call it a thin, or we use the term instant disaster recovery. And what that means is that when you invoke a DR workflow, and we'll go and show you that here in a little bit, you're only downloading a subset of the metadata, which is enough to bring that file system online with your applications. The amount of data that's downloaded is around maybe 5 megabytes of data, and it takes only a couple of minutes to bring that metadata download online with your applications. So you can do a DR very quickly. The cool thing also is that you can do a DR to both another data center, which is kind of shown here. Your data center goes down, you can do it to another data center. You can also do it to what we have as a StorSimple virtual appliance. The StorSimple virtual appliance resides in Azure and can be kind of spun up or spun down as needed, and it can be your DR facility. It could also be your DR test site. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. All right. So the next time we're going to go and talk about use cases. So what is StorSimple good at? This goes back to talking about the working set. StorSimple is good where you have a working set of data and then you have a lot of data that doesn't get accessed that often. Unstructured data types, associated with file systems, maybe large archives, are great ways that customers have been deploying StorSimple, have huge cost savings associated with it because now you're taking advantage of Azure Blob Storage for a bunch of stuff that you just don't access very often. The other thing that StorSimple has a good value for is eliminating VM sprawl. So if you have a bunch of VMs, thousands and thousands of VMs, and you never use any of them, I think someone told me yesterday that they had 2,000 VMs and they used 2 in a year. You can move VMs into Azure. That's like your VM archive. And then use your on-premise device just to run your active VMs. Additionally, SharePoint is a great way to use StorSimple as well. You can use remote blob storage and have the StorSimple volumes as your destination so that you can offload all of the blob storage associated with your SharePoint deployment into the StorSimple volumes, and then you reduce the impact on your high performance, maybe storage that's running your SQL content database, and then use StorSimple as a lower cost storage for the blob storage. There's another session on Friday that actually details that deployment quite a bit, 9 a.m. Friday morning, StorSimple in SharePoint. And then SQL Server. So you can do a couple of things. If you are doing it for SharePoint, you could run SQL on your content database. You can run some types of SQL workloads on the device as well. And then, so some of that comes down to sizing and making sure that the database fits the right sizing elements of your appliance. And then we talk about Azure workloads. So we have disaster recovery. We kind of talked about that. You can do that to another data center, or you could do it to the SVA. You can test out your DR scenarios, which is a really cool thing. You could actually port entire data sets that originate from your on-premise array, and you can move those into Azure and test out your DR scenario. Other things you can do is you can bring up cloud apps in Azure with an SVA, a StorSimple virtual appliance, and you can get to do unique things like business analytics or things along those lines. And then finally, dev test is another great workload. We have customers that are liking to deploy this to test out maybe new software environments, different types of IT infrastructure that they're building on the fly. Okay, so we kind of summed up all the features, all the hardware aspects, enterprise storage, similar to what you've always seen. We're going to go off and look at what that is, but I want to talk about the integrated management before we do that, because that's a large part of how you manage this enterprise solution. So this integrated management is important because this is now part of Azure Portal. This 8000 series, StorSimple 8000 series, is all managed through the Azure Portal, where you manage all the other Azure services you might be using. The first thing is there's a StorSimple Manager service. And if you go in there, you can have multiple services. So you can manage, if you have one in Asia or one in Europe and then a data center here, you could have different services for each of those devices, but you manage them all from the same StorSimple Manager service in Azure. The second part of that is that within a service, you can then manage multiple devices. You could have multiple physical devices, multiple virtual devices, and they're all managed from that same service. This also enables you to then fail over resources, volumes. You could clone volumes between any of those devices. And so any of the resources within a service can be interchanged using cloud snapshots. All right, the last part of that is that now that we're in Azure Portal, even though we're managing the storage component from the StorSimple Manager, you're completely integrated with other aspects of it, like VMs. If you're using Azure Compute, you can go and configure your StorSimple virtual appliance with the Azure VMs. Additionally, you can create virtual networks and create a virtual data center, and we're going to see how that's done here as we go. But before we start our management demo, I kind of want to introduce you to some of the infrastructure pieces that you're going to be seeing here. All right, so we have Azure Storage, and for the Azure Storage, you have your storage accounts. Those are created when you create your service, or you can have them already created. So this is blob storage, and then you have your StorSimple Manager service paired with your device. The pairing of the device and the service happens during setup On your console of your device, you have about 5 steps. You enter your network configuration, and then you enter a registration key that's generated from the service in the Azure portal. And that pairs the device into the management portal within a couple of minutes. Once that connection is made, everything else you do is through the Azure portal. And you can create what we call a volume container. And this is the grouping of volumes or your volume resources. Then you create your volumes. And this is just like a regular storage volume. This is your LUN that you're going to expose through your Windows server. That volume is where your data, your user data is going to come into. So when that data is stored on the volume, it'll either be stored then on the device, or it'll be stored in the cloud if it's ultimately tiered. Your volume container, which houses all the volumes together, points to your storage account. That's where it's defined. That's where it tells any of the data that's going to be stored on those volumes is stored in this region of the blob storage. That's what I own. That's what you own if you have the StorSimple. You can have multiple accounts, multiple storage accounts, and multiple volume containers. There we go. So we'll have multiple, and they can point to different areas of that blob storage. So we'll get to see how those are all created. And then the second part is backups. So when you're in your StorSimple manager and you created your volumes, it'll create a default policy for you, or you can go off and create different policies. So you can have daily, monthly, weekly, those different types of policies. Policies are assigned to a volume, and you can have multiple volumes, one volume assigned to each of those policies. When the backups are taken, they are then regenerated, or they show up in what's called a backup catalog. And a backup catalog spans across all the devices. So remember how we said you can have more than one device managed from a StorSimple Manager service. So there's a backup catalog, and when all of the backups will go and show up in this backup catalog, and they can be cloned or failed over to any of the devices in that StorSimple Manager service. So they're not unique to a device, they're unique to an entire service. You can have about 10,000 snapshots on a StorSimple solution, and then you can have up to about 16 volumes on any one policy. Therefore, if you're doing a restore, you could have up to 16 volumes being restored at any one time. Okay, so now that we've talked about a lot of the stuff that StorSimple is, we're going to go off and show you. So Jamie's got a very cool demo.
Wow, that is a lot of PowerPoint. Thanks for sticking around, guys. So yeah, we'll absolutely take a look at a lot of this. A couple things that I want to hit just right off the bat. One of the things that Megan mentioned was the fact that the StorSimple management service is able to do multiple devices. And so I got to switch my screen here first. Hold on. It's a whole lot easier for you to see if I actually share. All right. So this is the Azure portal. I'm actually logged into this with a demo account, but one of the things that I'll call out right away is that you'll notice that I actually have 2 services that we're looking at. The one that's highlighted at the top of the screen is the actual demo system that we're going to be using in this discussion. The second one is the system that's downstairs in the expo hall. And I can click on this and look at it. I can find dashboard metrics. This is just a system that we've been playing with the last couple of days, so there's not a whole lot here right now. We can certainly show you more downstairs if you'd so like to see that. The other thing that's interesting when we talk about the management paradigm that is used with Azure is that it is truly an outside-in type of approach. We are monitoring the service, and we can constantly alert you and keep you abreast of what's going on. And to make that point, I actually got an email at 1 o'clock this afternoon from the system that is actually running in the Paris Microsoft Technology Center. One of my responsibilities is sort of make sure that the devices are healthy around the world in the MTCs. And this is just showing that we had a job failure that occurred. We looked, the alert appeared today at 8:06 p.m. according to, that's Paris time, not local time, obviously. But it gives me some additional details and some recommended actions. This just comes into my inbox as part of a managed service that I subscribe to from Azure. And so this is part of what we're talking about when we say the management paradigm has changed. We're giving you integrated management with your on-prem devices as well as Azure Cloud Services. Now, the other thing that Megan mentioned was the concept of a registration key. And one of the initial questions that comes about when we start talking about hybrid cloud solutions is, how do I affinitize these devices with an actual subscription? There is a great little screenshot on MSDN that actually shows part of the setup wizard, which is the first step in deploying one of these units. But you'll notice that you are prompted here in the main window of this browser section for a service registration key. This is one of those key exchanges that Megan highlighted in the security screen. We had the dashed lines moving with the keys. And that actual key lives down here at the bottom of the portal. And if I select this registration key, I can actually go out and fetch that. And that key, when I copy it to the clipboard, can then be pasted into a terminal session where I go ahead and associate the device with the subscription inside of Azure. And so that's how we would initially deploy one of these units into production. This is a very simple process. If we go back here and look at this step-by-step document again on MSDN, what kind of language would you like to initiate this process with? You log in with a default password, you define IP addresses, subnet mask, DNS, NTP servers, and then you enter into this key exchange. This is a process that with the correctly configured network will take you less than 5 minutes. It is very quick, very easy. It is, pardon the pun, but you'll hear it plenty of times today, simple. So once I have my device associated, I can actually drill into this service and I'll get a dashboard showing me some initial performance metrics. You can see I've got some alerts down here, informational warning, critical, as well as jobs that have run in the past 24 hours. I can go in and look at my devices. And these are the devices that are associated with a specific subscription. Now I have a physical device here that's highlighted, as you can tell by the model number. And then I also have a virtual device that we've pre-provisioned. And we'll talk about virtual devices in a little bit more detail later on. But the thing that's important to note here is that I have a device that I can, again, manage from the outside in. If I roll down on the right-hand side, you'll see an activation date, model, details, and so on and so forth. The volume containers that Megan was mentioning are further defined within the device. And so if I click on volume containers, you'll notice that I have one that's already created called conferences, and it's associated with a specific storage account. Now, storage accounts in Azure, actually we can roll up here and look at that. This is my storage account. It's StorSimple Demo 01. And I can come in and actually look at the containers. This is where the blobs actually live inside of Azure. And if I wanted to go down and actually drill into this, you could actually see specific blocks of data along with their size and unique identifiers. This is where the bits actually land. But it's important to note that every one of those blocks are encrypted with a cipher key that is maintained by the device owner, by you, not Microsoft. Question in the back.
What kind of connection is required to say VPN?
Great question. Yeah, so the question for those who didn't hear it, what kind of connection is required for us to do this? This is not anything special that's required for the device to communicate. We're actually using standard REST APIs, and we're talking across 443. Hey, the device showed up. Phil, right on, man. Thanks a lot. So yeah, we're just talking outbound 443 with some 80. NTP is 123 DNS resolution, but again, that can be internal. There's a list on that MSDN page that defines all the port requirements. But to your specific question, it's not a VPN. It's just standard SSL. What I tell people all the time when you're trying to configure this and determine what do I need, if you can do online banking on that network interface, StorSimple can use it.
Okay. Is it supported using ExpressRoute?
Is it supported using ExpressRoute? Absolutely. It is supported to use ExpressRoute, but it is not required. Looking around for more hands. All right. Oh, got one in the back.
Your encryption address, is it software-based or embedded in the disk?
I'm sorry?
The encryption address
Yes?
or itself, is it software-based or is it the hardware?
It's software-based encryption, and again, it's part of that cipher key that you define. That's the AES 256-bit encryption that Megan was mentioning earlier, and that's at the block level, not the file level. One more. Don't be shy, man. Go ahead. Throw it right up there.
Are there any plans to incorporate the management of the 7000 series through the Azure?
So the question was, are there any plans to incorporate the management of the 7000 series devices with this interface? This device that we're looking at, and in this portal, this discussion is all around the 8000 series. At this point, I'm not authoritative on roadmap, but my understanding is the answer is no to that question. That could change. But at this point, we're focusing on 8,000 with the outside-in mentality, or I should say with the approach. Well, Dean down here from the engineering group's like, good answer. I think I got it right.
Do you guys support putting a certificate from an internal CA on there now?
Do we support putting a certificate from an internal CA on this device?
8,000 versus like the 7,000?
Okay, so from an encryption standpoint, the actual cipher key that is generated is not an imported cert. It is actually built through that initiation service.
When you're managing the device on premise, that where you do the web portal?
This is, so a different management paradigm from the 7000. Let's work off of that because that's a detailed question that probably deserves a whole lot more explanation than we can go into right now. But suffice to say, the short answer to your question is this encryption key that we've mentioned a couple times is generated by the device and is not imported per se. Couple things I want to show you real quick. This, again, just, last one. All right, then we're moving.
If the device is generating the encryption key, it's not exported, then how do you have multiple devices which could use the DR scenario where you put that encrypted data back to?
So the question is, if the device is not, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to try and go slow here. If the key is not exportable, and the encrypted data has been moved to Azure, it's coming back to a different device, how do I decrypt it?
Do you want me to take it?
Go
I
ahead.
understand
You
it.
jump into that one, Megan. I
Okay,
can try, but Megan can probably tell you better than I
So
can.
I'll talk. Yeah. So when you register your first device, you enter the registration key, and it spits out the encryption key. The administrator needs to save off that encryption key that's been spit out. Then when they register any subsequent devices to that service, they enter both the registration key and the encryption key to any subsequent devices. Therefore, all devices under the same service have both the same registration key and encryption key saved on them. And that's how, whenever you fail over a clone, it can access the data because it has both those.
That whole key exchange thing will hurt your head. There's a really great white paper that one of the security engineers actually wrote and authored. If you come up afterwards, I can get you a link to that, and it will go into the gory nuts and bolts details of exactly what we're talking about. So back to demo, what I've got up here is the actual device management, or the service management screen. And if we click here, you'll see this is where I can look at the actual devices. This is the physical device that we have set up for this demonstration. It's not that device, but it's one that's online and is fully functional. You'll notice here that we also have a virtual device underneath this. If we focus in on the physical device for just a moment, here's where we get into the volume containers that Megan was mentioning. These are where... Oh, sorry, I thought I heard. So this is where we define our volumes. This is our unit of failover inside the cloud. And one of the things that's important to note is that you've got to kind of scope these from a sizing standpoint based on failover. We'll talk a little bit about that more as we go through here. But if I can open up the conferences volume container, and this was pre-populated with a little bit of data ahead of time, we can click on Add. And this is how we would add a volume. We'll call this one Ignite 2015, just in keeping with the naming convention. And then in deference to Cinco de Mayo, we're going to make this 5 terabyte volume. The usage type is primary and archive. And sometimes people wonder, well, what's the difference here between these two drop-downs? This effectively defines the size of the block that you will be writing to the unit. So Megan showed you how the block sizes were moving around with fingerprints and whatnot. A primary volume is a 64K block size. An archive volume is 8 times that, or 512. And the difference there is that we're going to sacrifice a little bit of dedupe opportunity, but we'll gain a lot of CPU benefit from deduplication and tiering perspectives. If we know this is archive data, we're not really going to be using it a whole lot. This larger value is attractive. We'll keep this one primary. And then lastly, what we need to do is associate this volume with a specific device. An access control record is just an IQN, an iSCSI initiator that we've previously defined that says this server or iSCSI initiator can talk to this volume. Once we've associated the volume, we can actually go off and create that. And again, this is a service that we are operating from Azure. So anywhere I have an SSL connection, I can do this. This is not a VPN necessitated activity. But I'll go off and create this 5 terabyte volume. You'll see that it's online. And then I can flip over to a virtual, so here's my server. And if we go to the action pane and rescan our disks, you'll notice that in the bottom, I've got a 5 terabyte volume of unallocated space. Now, I can bring this volume online. Once I bring it online, I'll initialize it, and we can create a volume. One of the things that I'll call out, we want to make sure this is a GPT disk so that we can exceed that 2 terabyte limit that the operating system imposes on the volume size. And then we'll create a volume. We'll step quickly through this. We'll give it a volume letter. What's available? We'll give it E. Just keep the defaults and move through. The allocation unit size. Recall I was talking earlier about the block sizes. This is where we want this to match. And so we'll go to 64K, and then this volume label, again, just to keep things neat and clean, Ignite 2015. We'll click Next and Finish. And in a moment, we'll run through a quick format of this volume. Now, prior to our discussion, I did take a couple pictures. You'll see here I got Philip. I got a picture of Philip. We can go ahead and blow up. He was kind enough to smile. We're going to put Philip and a picture of the table into our Ignite volume. I don't have a whole lot of content right there right now, but we're going to use this to show you guys that, in fact, this data, which is residing on this server, will actually move from the physical location up to a virtual device through some disaster recovery exercises that we'll put forth in just a moment. So I'll go ahead and open up my volume. Where's my E drive? 5 terabyte volume. We'll go ahead and copy my 2 pictures here. Paste them. Provide administrator. Yes, it's good. Do that for all items. There's our 2 pictures. Go ahead and close that up. And so now that we have our volume, what we'll do is go back to our StorSimple UI. Megan, how am I doing on time?
You're good.
Okay. The one thing that I skipped through, and I apologize for this in advance, but there's a backup policy that is automatically created when we provision a volume. And so you'll see here that I have a backup policy. By default, this is a cloud snapshot that is done every day at 10:30 p.m. local time. This backup is retained for 30 days, and if I wanted to, I could alter this to make it a longer-term retention cycle. I could create additional backup policies and match this up to really, really long backup times. I think the maximum of allowable backup retention is somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 years. We can work through those numbers later if you so choose. It's 999 backups times 64 weeks or something along that structure. That notwithstanding, this is our backup policy. And what we'll do before we get finished is we'll take a snapshot of this volume and use it for some later demonstrations this afternoon. Did I get everything I need to? Mm-hmm. Are we good?
Yep.
All right. Let's take a snapshot real quick and jump into it. I'll give you the talking stick back in just a minute. So here's our backup policies, and you'll see here's our Ignite volume. We'll click in here, and then we can take it back up. We'll do a cloud snapshot. You'll also notice there's a local snapshot option. If you're bandwidth constrained, you can still take snapshots and store them locally. But I always advocate to take a cloud snapshot in that it follows the number one rule in disaster recovery, which is to get your data out of the building. Question here in the green shirt.
So if you have a DR site and you do quarterly or biannual failovers,
Yes.
you have two devices pointing to the data at the same time so that you can leverage snapshots to do some of your DR testing.
So the question, and help me, interrupt me if I misstated this incorrectly. If you have a disaster recovery site and you want to perform a disaster recovery exercise on either a quarterly or a biannual basis, semi-annual basis, and you want to take a snapshot and then restore that snapshot in your disaster recovery facility, can you do that? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, the answer is absolutely yes. A snapshot of the data is a point-in-time copy, and it is a non-disruptive activity, such that I could go ahead and do exactly what you're talking about, take this manual snapshot, just like we've done here in this demonstration, and then go over to my disaster recovery facility and effectively mount that snapshot and demonstrate to whoever wants to certify my backup that, in fact, yes, I have a snapshot, it's fully consumable. This data will be referencing blocks in Azure, so it won't be disruptive to the production system and will allow for the simultaneous access of that data for business purposes. Now, don't mistake the answer. We are not looking at a synchronous access of the data per se. But yes, I think the intent of your question is, can I do that and not have a business outage or a business interruption? And the answer is yes. And we'll actually show you how you can do that with not only a disaster recovery facility, like you talked about, we can actually use Azure as a backup or as a disaster recovery location and hopefully help you save on some real estate costs. So with that said, Megan,
Great.
I think I'm done.
Yeah, thanks. Right. So that was our first demo. We're going to go back to one more question here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Can you see the deduplication rates? Deduplication rates are a little bit, yes, you can. You absolutely can. They're a little bit fuzzy to try and discern. I don't know if I can show them to you on this system. You can kind of see it here where we have on this line. Uh-oh.
You're good.
Sorry.
Switch. There you go.
So from the dashboard, you'll notice that I have a couple of lines where we're talking about primary storage that is used in the blue case, and then the purple line is my cloud storage that I'm consuming. So if I want to see my dedupe rates here, you could say it's roughly 2x. My math is close. It's a little better than 2x. But that's where I go from 32 to 15. Now, obviously, you're going to have more data than what we're showing here, 45 gigs of data in a demo. But that would be your deduplication ratio.
Previous StorSimple series, you get a better overview of the interface, the old interface.
Yes. So I think the question or the statement is, on the previous release of the StorSimple systems, we had some deduplication rates and some pretty graphs and whatnot that were presented as part of the 7000 web UI. We don't have that capability today with the current set of tools simply because we're using Azure as the management platform. Now, with that said, I can always go into the devices section and get some of the rich reporting that's exposed by Azure by simply clicking on this monitor tab, and then I can go and look at things. And again, this is demo on the fly, so who knows what we're going to see here. But you'll, from a capacity utilization standpoint for cloud across all volume containers, I only have one, but I can start getting some of these counters, if you would, and I can add counters as well to try and expose some of what you're looking for and achieve that customized reporting that many people ask for.
Here, one more.
Last one.
The primary storage needs more space. Is primary storage not duplicated?
The primary, well, I think what you're seeing here is the fact that we have such a small amount of data on this device that we're not even into the dedupe tier that Megan showed us. If you recall, there was a linear tier, a dedupe tier, and then a SAS tier. And because we haven't eclipsed that linear tier, we're not into a deduplication scenario. Absolutely. All right, Megan, now you're back up.
So we're going to cruise through the next couple. We'll probably ask everyone to hold questions till the end just so we can make sure we get through the rest of the content. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So utilizing the StorSimple Manager and then using that data in Azure, we're going to move on to this section. So this is the section where we kind of get to really examine on what you can additionally do now because you are using the cloud. So we saw that you can have a StorSimple virtual appliance in Azure. So you can build this on the fly. We'll get to see that here in a second with the demo. The StorSimple virtual appliance runs as a StorSimple software image in an Azure VM. However, it all shows up in your StorSimple Manager, and it's all managed through the StorSimple Manager service. It shows up as an 1100 device in your manager, and this has a capacity of 30 terabytes and runs on a combination of Azure disks and just Azure Blob storage. The StorSimple virtual device is basically the building block for the rest of that virtual data center you can build in the Azure portal. So you can build out your virtual networks, you can create Azure Compute with VMs, and then you can build them all together for kind of this virtual data center that you have on the fly. So a great example is we had someone ask if you can do DR testing. Absolutely. You can build up a virtual data center there with your StorSimple virtual appliance. You could clone your data set onto the SVA. You could set up Azure VMs, bring that up, and you could test out your DR scenario just like that without ever affecting your primary data set. It's just a clone of the data set that originates in your data center. So here, kind of what I already talked about. DR testing, great example. People love to do this with the SVA. You can do data mining. So you have a lot of data that originates from your on-premise data center, and you want to be able to data mine stuff in there. So you could put that in an SVA, bring up your applications, do data mining, indexing, searching, anything like that. You could do dev test. You want to test out new software, infrastructure, that type of stuff. You can do all of these things by simply spinning up an SVA. You can build this infrastructure in less than 15 minutes. Say you want to build it up for actual disaster recovery. You want to use an SVA for your DR site. However, you build your SVA, your StorSimple virtual appliance, and then you can actually just spin it down. You don't have to pay for that Azure Compute long term. You can spin it down and only spin it up when you realize that you need it. So there's a lot of things you can do and have on-demand resources available to you with this type of infrastructure. So this is set up for the final demo. So you saw we had all those volumes created in our volume container. So what we're going to show you is we're going to show you two things. We're going to show you the clone feature and the failover feature. So how are those two different? Clone is where we're actually copying the data. So we're creating a redundant volume. So then when you go in and make changes to that volume, you're not affecting the primary data set. That's why it might be good for a DR testing scenario. A failover is where you're reassigning the ownership of that volume container to a new device. So you're not actually making a copy of anything, you're just rehydrating that data to a new device. So that's the failover, and that's what you would use for a disaster recovery, that you're just trying to get all of my volumes back online on a new device because my original device has failed. So those are the two differences. Once again, remember that whenever you're doing a clone or a failover, all we're doing is we're rehydrating just about 5 megabytes of data. That's metadata associated with that volume. So it doesn't matter the volume size. It's always going to take you the same amount of time to bring a volume online for either one of these operations. It's very predictable, and that's what people do like about it. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it off so we can see some of this
All right,
stuff.
let's try again, or continue trying. So just to level set what we've got going on here. This is actually a Windows server that's residing in Mountain View, California. The device is sitting in the same data center with it. And we also have a virtual appliance that is running in Azure. And so if we go back here and look at our devices screen, the device that's highlighted lives in California. This virtual device is actually running in Azure. I believe it's in Quincy, Washington. So definitely a difference from a geography perspective. The first thing that we're going to do is go back and look at our backup catalog. And actually, before I do that, I'll just call out real quickly. If you're wondering, we talked about these virtual appliances. If I look on the device screen, I can actually create a virtual device by simply clicking on this icon within Azure. This is an automated process. They're pulling this out of the gallery. We could call this the Ignite SVA or StorSimple Virtual Appliance. It can only contain lowercase letters. I have a virtual network that's been set up. Now, the question earlier was something along the lines of, do I need to have special networks set up for StorSimple to work? This is the actual virtual network within Azure that will allow a virtual file server to access this. So you could think of this as like a virtual iSCSI network inside of Azure. And then I can create a storage account to associate with this. I check a box indicating that I understand that this virtual device will be hosted in a Microsoft data center, and check the box. Now, this will kick off a job that will go off and run and automatically provision a StorSimple virtual device. The process takes about 12 minutes, and in the interest of time, we're not going to wait for that. So we'll go ahead and just leverage the one that already exists, this SVA Demo 01. If we go into the backup catalog, you'll see that I have an opportunity to filter this catalog either based on devices, policies, or volumes. And what we're going to do is just go off and get this volume. This is the 5 terabyte volume that I created for 2 pictures, which is a little bit of an over-provisioning nightmare, but work with me on that. And so this is the actual volume of the snapshot that we created a few moments ago. I'm going to go ahead and clone this snapshot. And so this is the exact scenario that we were talking about from a disaster recovery testing facility a moment ago. However, in this situation, instead of targeting the source device, I'm actually going to target a virtual controller in Azure and give this a volume name. And we will call this the Ignite clone. You'll see that the required capacity is 5 terabytes and the available capacity is 30 terabytes. For those of you who are planning on adopting this strategy, I would strongly encourage you that if you want to leverage the virtual appliance, to limit the size of your volume container to 30 terabytes. Now, you can certainly grow a volume container to be much larger than that, but in so doing, you will preclude yourself from being able to actually leverage the virtual appliance. You'll actually have to fail over to a physical. So again, just be aware of that 30 terabyte limit. It's a best practice, not a requirement. We check to ensure that the volume name is unique, and then we assign an iSCSI initiator that will leverage this volume. Again, we're zoning the virtual appliance, and for that, we will use a virtual file server running in Azure. If we check this box, we'll kick off that job that creates the clone job. You'll see the job is successfully completed, or successfully created. We can actually view the status of this job in a separate menu, and we'll go through in a moment. You'll see that it's running. Here's our SVA that we were trying to create, and then also our clone job. Now, over off of our virtual machine, or our RDP session, you'll see this is my physical device, and here's my Ignite volume. It's the E drive. We've taken, there's the pictures of Philip and the table. If I go back over into the virtual machine in Azure, depicted by a blue background, and go through a rescan of the disks, if I'm lucky, the job will have completed. The demo gods are smiling. And you will see that I have a snapshot that I have now presented to that virtual machine from a virtual StorSimple appliance the volume is currently offline, but as soon as I bring it online, there's my volume with the E drive. And if I double click in here, you'll see there's Philip in the table, and there's Philip's picture. Right? And you're like, okay, cool, I've seen this. This is interesting. How did that happen so quickly? Well, what's actually happened is I've only requested the blocks for the JPEG that make up this 195 KB JPEG, along with a metadata map representing the volume. I haven't downloaded any of the blocks for the picture of the table yet. And so those are still in Azure. If I requested them, they too would be brought down and populated upon that virtual appliance, or the disk structure that makes up that virtual appliance. But this is how I can do an easy failover example and test of my DR facilities. If I wanted to, I could go back and create some new content in this same directory, and create a new folder, right? This volume's still online because I've just taken that copy of the snapshot and populated it inside of Azure. And so that allows me to do cloning and sort of real-time DR proof points. The other scenario that we enable with this approach is what happens if something really bad does happen? How do I ensure that my environment is protected if I have a fire in my data center or if the building goes away? And so in that realm, what I can do is I can actually, and I need to go back in and take my volume offline, otherwise it's going to have a difficult time. Bear with me for a moment. Where's my VM? We'll take this Ignite volume offline. You can come back to the StorSimple devices section, and here I'm going to take this physical device and fail it over. So recall that the volume container is the unit of failover, and this one is saying, well, we're going to take all 5 of these volumes, the TechEd 2012, 2013, 2014, Ignite 2015, and then a separate volume that I've actually linked to my OneDrive account with a whole bunch of pictures, again, for demo purposes. I'm going to move all 5 of those volumes from the existing device, which in a disaster scenario may be offline, to a target device, which is my virtual appliance. And so this 11.09 terabytes is going to go against an available capacity of 25 terabytes. Again, it used to be 30. I used 5 for my clone. And then a confirmation page where I check the box to say, yes, please go and do that. Now, this will kick off, again, another job creation where we can go and look at that. This process takes roughly 90 seconds. And during this time, we're actually going to reassign the ownership of those volume containers that I showed you earlier. So if you recall, if we come back up and look at the storage containers, some of these make up the volumes. Some of them are not used, or parts of other pieces of my infrastructure. And there's some really smart guys in support who can run detailed analysis to figure out which one exactly goes with a specific volume. But what we're doing is assigning the ownership of these volumes to a new device. Or excuse me, the ownership of this volume container to a new device. And so what we'll do is we'll go back and look at the job. Well, let's go see if the job's finished first. Megan, do you have any interjectory here while we wait for this?
We could come back and look at this, but I think maybe we'll move on and get Les up here.
We're getting
so
the hook?
chat.
All right, yeah, let's make sure we're not running out of time. I apologize for that. We'll come back and look at this at the end. But while we wait for this job to run, one of the things that is, I think this is all interesting from a technology standpoint, it's really encouraging to me to actually be able to introduce to you guys a gentleman who's actually running this in production, right? It's easy for a couple people from Microsoft to come up here and go, oh, look at all this PowerPoint, and look at all these demos. This is wonderful. But we're privileged enough to be joined by a gentleman by the name of Les Rowland. Les actually has StorSimple in production. Les's company is Textron. And for those of you who don't know, Textron is a manufacturer of Cessna aircraft, Bell helicopters, and some other things that I'm probably forgetting. But those are two really cool toys that I one day hope I can have. But Les has got some insight that I think he can share with us. And without further ado, let's get Les up for a couple questions. And please welcome Les.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it working?
It's working.
Is the mic on? Right on.
So.
So one of the things that I think a lot of people have a tendency to wonder is, what were the drivers that helped you pick a hybrid approach and StorSimple in particular?
Trying to think what's going to be the best way to answer.
Here you go. Here's a softball, Les. Go for it.
Like most companies, we started this journey in 2013, and the primary driver for us, I think, like most people with experience, is how do we reduce our cost? How do we kind of improve our operations and at the same time reduce the capital expenditures we have on a reoccurring basis? And so we were actually given the challenge by our CFO to reduce a significant amount of money, about $50 million out of our operating budget. And we had to go scurrying and figure out how we could do that. So part of that was to define a cloud strategy, and as part of that cloud strategy was to look at what we could do from a storage perspective. We originally started off looking at archive solutions and ways to, since no one ever wants to hit the delete key, of how we could archive that data, identify it, and push it off. But at the end of the day, we looked at several different products and talked to our legal folks and compliance, and that just had a really long tail in it. We needed something that we could execute much faster on, get an ROI much quicker on, and so we started looking at how we could approach, hybrid storage and cloud storage.
Fantastic. So one of the things that people sometimes, we heard a couple questions today about security. How did that play into your decision, and what were some other factors that ultimately helped you decide on StorSimple?
One of it, from a security perspective, when Jamie kind of introduced, Textron is we're basically 9 different business units. Most of them are in the aerospace and defense, Department of Defense type businesses, and so security is very paramount to us. We are controlled by regulatory and compliances from DISA and DCAA and all the other 3 other acronyms you can look at. So we had to find a solution for us that would meet those requirements, and so we went back and talked to our DoD partners and the folks that the regulatory agencies that we deal with to say, what is it you need and what is it we have to prove out for you to make sure that any solution we do would support that. So that was kind of the first paramount thing. We looked at, like I said, the number of different solutions. Some of the partners and some of the vendors we looked at the point in time actually kind of went out of business as we were going through that. Back in those days, there was a lot of things in cloud backup and cloud strategies and companies kind of coming and going. So that was kind of concerning to us. So we wanted to make sure that we had a solution that would scale with us. We wanted a kind of a tier 1 provider. We wanted something that would be secure, and so we kind of looked at got introduced to StorSimple. That was right around, like I said, 2 years ago. And so we sat down with, the Microsoft IT. We sat down with their security folks, and we really went through a pretty comprehensive and detailed analysis of what makes everything tick behind that. And at the end of the day, Microsoft was able to convince our security and compliance folks that it provided the level of enterprise class storage, it provided the security controls that let us control the keys, let us control the data, and we walked away with a very secure feeling that our data was protected when it moved to the cloud.
Cool. So I know one of the things you told me when we were discussing prior to coming up on stage today, can you shed a little bit of insight onto the cost savings? Because one of my favorite monikers is the only 2 things that matter are cost and functionality.
Right.
And you threw some numbers at me, and I was like, "Are you really? Did somebody help share that?" Because I was stunned when I heard these numbers.
Somewhat embarrassed to do so. So part of our, like I said, out of that $50 million that we had to go save, when we really went back and looked at what our infrastructure costs were, almost 50% of our cost was in storage and backup. And so that had kind of the biggest bullseye or biggest target on it. So when we kind of looked back and thought what we could go save and looking at what we're paying with our outsourced provider for backup and storage, there was a considerable difference, almost a 60 or 70% difference between what we thought we'd be paying in Azure and what we pay for those services today. Now, to kind of put that in perspective is, within our lines of businesses, we have very kind of rigid standards for backup and tiered storage and what we've implemented, and we kind of have a one-size-fits-all approach for them. So some of our smaller business units would really work to try and, leverage, storage or look at their cost very tightly because of, their budgets were small. But some of the larger ones like Bell and Cessna really didn't. But at the end of the day, when we went back and really looked at what our spend was year over year from when we started this in 2013 to today, we're down $1 million a month in our run rate from a storage perspective. Now, most of that is attributed to what we're doing with StorSimple. It's probably $750,000. Another piece of that is just pieces where we've been able to go back and delete data or take data offline.
Yeah, and so there's some marketing people who are just to highlight that, $1 million a month.
Yeah, our run rate over since, like I said, since August of 2013 through today.
Your mileage may vary,
yeah.
But that's compelling in and of itself. Can you share with us, I think Megan's got a slide from an architectural perspective. It's a technical conference. What'd you do?
And I know this was a question from someone in the audience earlier about what it took to stand this up. And when they originally asked me about an architecture slide, they went, it's a couple boxes. There's nothing really tough about this. So we rolled out, front-ending the StorSimple appliance. We have a Windows Server 2012 Server R2 that's basically what we would refer to as a medium class server. It basically has 4 cores, 32 gig of memory. It's virtualized in every implementation we have. We run MPIO with it. We're running VSS for local snapshots, so we can do self-service recovery of data, kind of the right-click and restore previous version. And basically, we have a network that we've created a isolated iSCSI VLAN and pipe that into our VM farm. So it's a fairly simplistic architecture. On here, you'll see where there is probably a firewall, and where we created kind of a DMZ and the firewall to kind of take our traffic out, to the internet. When we first started this, this is the configuration we have, and we've since moved to an MPLS configuration. So half of our appliances are running that, and half are still in this piece here. The reason why we have in our sites where we have internet connection, we did a dedicated internet connection for them because all of our primary internet traffic is backhauled through a single location. Okay. We didn't want all that storage traffic backhauling to that, so we wanted to provide a dedicated circuit for this first few we put in.
Perfect. I know the little red light started blinking, which means we're almost done. Can you sum up some final thoughts real quickly and also give us an insight on maybe some future plans on where you're going next with regards to cloud adoption strategy and whatnot?
Yeah, so we have 4 more units on order. 3 of them are an 8000 series, and so we're looking at putting those in our engineering center in India. We're going to put 1 in our Fort Worth office, and some of our legal and compliance folks are going to be doing some things with that for e-discovery and some other pieces. Probably the biggest win I think we got out of this is this was really a catalyst for us for a cloud journey. Our biggest kind of cheerleaders for this project have really been our CEOs, our CIOs, and our CFOs, because it was something that was incredibly easy to implement. Most IT projects, when you bring in something new, have their bumps, and we had ours as well. But it was something that we were able to overcome very quickly, and it was easy for each business unit to roll those out and manage.
Awesome. No, thank you very much. We appreciate your sponsorship and your business. Thank you very much. Megan, I know we're close to being on our. You've got a summary slide. Let's go run through that real quick.
Yeah, we're just tying it up. So cost savings. I mean, he couldn't say it any better. $1 million a month. So 40 to 60% lower TCO. Their cost. integrated data protection, being able to do DR, test DR, on-demand DR. There's all kinds of integrated data protection that this solution brings to you. So that's one. And then the one last thing is the innovation around the integrated management and the infrastructure, being able to manage both on-premise and the cloud. So those are kind of the 3 points I wanted to highlight real quick. I have a resources slide. You can just kind of scan that as we go. I'll go right back to this, but really quick, they want to make sure that everyone's aware of the Azure Challenge sweepstakes. So this is, I'm sure you've seen the slide from other sessions. Maybe you've been in for Azure, but catch that. And I'll go back to the resources slide so you can check that out a little bit longer. And we are tied up. We will stay for questions because I know we packed a lot in. So come on up if you have any questions.
Thanks very much, guys.